We're live?
Yep.
Thanks. I think that says present. Oops. Hey everyone, sorry for the delay. Little trouble projecting my screen. I'm actually looking at it looks like a phone screen right now, so I'm going to be having trouble clicking around. I was planning on doing live demos. This might look crazy. We'll see how it goes. I'm already into the time, so I figure we'll get started. So this talk is low-cost websites with Plenti. So what is Plenti? Plenti is a free and open source framework that we've been working on to build lightweight websites. Now, that's kind of the mission of what it's doing, but how is it actually, what's the technology behind it? Like, how is this actually being architected to build websites? I think we could start by getting a common terminology. So people use a lot of different terms to describe these things, and maybe you come from different perspectives. So is Plenti Jamstack? Have you heard of that? Yes, Plenti is a Jamstack application. But Jamstack is kind of a funny term because lots of sites use JavaScript APIs and markup, and it doesn't really communicate exactly how you build the site. So yes, it's Jamstack. Is it a static site generator? Yes, these are kind of the same concepts. So it's a static site generator. If you've heard that term, SSG, I find that kind of a funny term because you can have really dynamic experiences with a static site generator. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's completely static. So yes, this is SSG, but I think there's a better term for this. So I'm trying to make a thing happen here, build time rendering. Some people throw this concept around. I don't hear it that much in the mainstream. I think we should make it a thing. So tell your friends about build time rendering. I think it's a better way of describing this. So people want to say, is this client side rendering? Is it server side rendering? Plenti does both those things, but it matters when that happens. It's not if that happens, and I think that's where the confusion comes in. So on-demand rendering is when somebody comes to your website, your site goes to some back-end programming language, maybe it pulls some data from a database, and it builds a page and returns it. Build time rendering is we're building all that stuff beforehand, and then we're deploying it, so by the time you visit the site, all that stuff has already been generated, all that work has already been done. So it's a build time render engine. That's how I like to describe Plenti, but all those other terms work as well. It kind of works similar to maybe Gatsby, if you're familiar with that, where it builds HTML fallbacks for all your different pages on your website, but then it hydrates it into a single page application that gets really fast client-side routing. I know it's a little technical. I don't want this to be a technical talk, honestly. So I made the claim that it's cheap. Why am I making this claim that Plenti is cheap? It's kind of a bold claim. Well, one is it doesn't have a database, so you don't have to worry about the challenges of deploying a database where sometimes you have to pull configuration out of a database, maybe track it in code, deploy it, re-upload it to a database. If a database goes down, you have to worry about bringing it up or doing backups, that kind of thing. Everything in Plenti is just flat files. It's just JSON. It's a kind of a web standard, so that all sits on your back end. You can track it very easily in Git, so you don't have to worry about the complication of something like a database. With that, you can serve your entire site on a CDN. So in like a traditional CMS, you might serve your images or your CSS or your JavaScript on a CDN, but the main part of your site will be based off a server. In this case, since it's all flat files, you can serve the whole thing, the templates, the backend, everything. Even the CMS gets served over the CDN. So if people aren't familiar with CDN, it's a content delivery network. It's basically a really cheap and easy way to host assets, and it has distributed servers all over the world, so people visiting your site from different places get really fast delivery. And you don't have to worry about the back-end coding. It's basically flat files sitting on a system. And there's I think it brings a lot in terms of ease of development. So because there's a lot of less complication in the way that you're developing these things, I tend to be able to build UI experiences a little bit faster than I would in some other technologies that have a lot more robust features to them. So it's a trade-off. Simpler features, maybe easier development, but you have some trade-offs on the more enterprise level of apps. And what's kind of nice about Plenti is any valid JSON can be your content source. So sometimes you don't have a lot of control over the content you're getting. You're pulling from an API, and maybe typically in some other systems, you might have to map those API fields to the fields that your static site generator expects, or you have to manipulate things. In our case, as long as it's valid JSON, you can build your site off it. So throw any JSON you want at it and just make sure that you account for that experience in your templating side of things. So we're really trying to create a really transparent layer between the data and the display, so you're not questioning and trying to figure out how do I get this raw data value, how do I put it in a way I want. It's really easy to just map those things and connect them. So what kind of benefits does this give for security? Well, one is there's less moving parts. So the assets that are being served to your end user are static, so there's not a lot in terms of SQL injections or things you have to worry about there. They're just static files, so it makes your security experience a lot easier. You can kind of sleep easy at night knowing that there's not a lot to hack on your website. Also, the way that Plenti builds sites, it's your output is decoupled from the engine that's running it, so you can kind of throw the site out. Like, it's very ephemeral. You can just kind of toss the site down, bring it up somewhere else, deploy somewhere else, change it. So it makes it really, really lightweight in that way. You can do security updates on your client's terms. So I don't know if anyone works with small clients with small budgets, but they might have some tension there where they say, hey, you keep pinging me that you have to charge us for doing this, like weekly security updates or whatever it is, weekly maintenance. And you can kind of avoid a lot of those challenges by doing them on your client's terms. So since it's static sites, you don't have that steady drumbeat of like, I have to do the security update every week. And then if there are plugins or things in your tool chain that need to be updated, when they make requests, you can basically bundle those things together so they feel like they're getting value for the time that they're requesting of you. And then we also have this concept of an ejectable core. So basically, all the engine stuff that's happening sits in a virtual file system that you never see unless you want to eject it. So the routing, the entry points, the CMS files, the way that hydrates, all that stuff is kind of sitting behind the scenes. And you can change that if you want to eject from that and write to your local file system, but you can keep it in the background. And one of the benefits of that is as we update things, essentially, your site will get those things for free. So as long as you build with a newer version of Plenti, you get all those updates for free. Of course, you may find that you don't want us updating things behind the scenes that might potentially break your site, so you can always lock your Plenti site at a certain version if you want. You can say, okay, version 5.5 is really working well for me. I'm locking my local and my build for my remote site to that version, and then I'll check for updates manually, and I'll just update that number. But you don't have to pull in files or anything like that. It all happens virtually because that's the nature of it. Now, one of the important concepts with Plenti, and something I want to show off, is the CMS that's integrated with. So we're using a Git-CMS, and I think it might make sense to explain how Git-CMS works because maybe a lot of folks haven't seen this before. You've probably seen traditional CMSs, maybe you've seen headless CMSs, where you have a separate service and you have some API to your site. The Git-CMS works a little differently. So you start with a repository. You can use GitLab. In this case, Plenti supports GitLab, so that might be a good starting point. This is where your code sits, your content, everything sits in your Git repository. When changes happen in your Git repository, that signals to a build process, so a continuous integration, continuous delivery process, to basically, what it does is it spins up a Docker container and it does some work for you. So in our case, it'll do a Plenti build on the code changes. So you have code changes, build the site, and then the delivery will deploy that. You can deploy your site to any host. A lot of times people will choose an integrated hosting solution like GitLab Pages. This is free hosting that's integrated to GitLab itself. So once the site is built, it deploys it automatically to GitLab Pages, and this is where you can actually go as an end user and see the end site and interact with it. Also, since we talked about shipping the CMS with the CDN, you can see that the CMS is included at this point. So somebody, an admin, could log into the site here, authenticate to GitLab through OAuth, and then essentially they could edit the site, which would make changes via Git API, and that would write back to the repository, and it would the loop would continue again. So essentially, you can have a remote website that can be edited by a non-technical client without managing a server, database, or any of that stuff. It's all a part of that process with a continuous loop there. Now, why might you want to use a Git-backed CMS? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One big one is that everybody's speaking the same language. So as a developer, you speak in Git, but your client doesn't necessarily speak that language. Now they can write Git without knowing that they're writing Git. They feel like they're editing a web form. You get to see exactly who's making changes, when they're making changes, and if anything goes wrong, you know exactly where to go to pinpoint those things. And everybody's speaking the same common language behind the scenes, which is kind of nice. It also ships alongside your site, so you don't have to worry about hosting another solution like a headless CMS. It just ships right along with your site. And we also have some discoverability built into our CMS. So right after JSON content, without setting up any CMS configuration, we'll try to give you an editing experience that makes sense for the content that you presented us with. And then it also provides atomic deploys and rollbacks. So essentially, every time you build a build of your site, it's a complete site that can live on its own. And if anything ever breaks, it's trivial to roll back to a working state You can also do branching strategies where maybe you want your main branch to go to a production site, your develop branch to go to a dev or a staging environment, and you can have all these different builds going off based on a really simple branching strategy. So, maybe you've heard of some different technology. I think Plenti most closely resembles taking like a Hugo static site generator and putting a Netlify CMS editor on top of it. I did this a lot back in like 2017. I thought this was a pretty innovative way to do websites. There's some challenges with this. Previews don't really work because Netlify CMS expects React components. Hugo uses Go templates. You have to do a lot of mapping back and forth between the two to make them sync up. So there's a lot of challenges, but the concepts are similar. Get back CMS with a Go-backed static site generator. I would say what we do is we kind of more tightly couple those. So we're more like a Huglify CMS. We're not using that as like our name, but like you can think of us more like that. So it's an experience that's more tightly coupled. And it's all good and well to talk about this, but I think it's really helpful to take a look at like what this actually looks like in action. And this is going to be the interesting part for me to actually set up to see if I can do this. Okay. So I have, oh no, I don't even have my code editor open. Let's open up a code editor. So this is, I hope, my test site. So we have a bunch of themes. Maybe I can show you. So on Plenti's site, this is the website for the project. If you go to themes, you can see there's a bunch of themes here that you can choose from to get started. Some of these might be in various states of compatibility with the newest version of Plenti. We break the API a fair amount to push development along since we're pre 1.0 release. But this is one such theme. Is that and I could basically Plenti serve. So I'm starting up a local web server here, and essentially what I'm doing is let's go. This is one of our themes that was on that website, right? So this is a basic working theme that we built in Plenti. It's for like a gym, and essentially what we can do here is you can add a CMS. We've already done this. It's really trivial to add the CMS. There's basically a magic prop called user, and you can put a user login anywhere on your page. You can create a link on the page that just calls user.login, or in our case, we created, or I created this little modal. So it's at login, I believe. So I just made a modal here. I designed this. I made it myself. This is not something you get plenty out of the box, but it's just essentially it's a link. And when you're on your local, we don't do anything tricky with auth. So if you're building locally, you're just writing to your local file system. Anybody can authenticate, so all you have to do is click the link and you're authenticated. You get a little CMS admin bar at the top with some different actions so you can edit your current pages. You can manage things like media. I can come over here. I can see my library of media on my site. So these are the different pictures being used on the site. I can upload new media. I can manipulate media by coming here and like either downloading, deleting, or changing media. Let's take a look at the editing experience. I put this into basically a component-based architecture. So you can design your editing experience any way you want, but these are all just different component widgets on the page. So for instance, I could grab this about section. I could move it above our top section there. I can move it below. I mean, you can do the same thing by clicking these little arrows. That does essentially the same thing. On the site, we can edit right on the site. So this is our hero component. You can see that. Let's see if I can figure out how to do this. All these, this content editor corresponds to the display over here. So I could come here. I could change the text on page. You could take things like these elements here, these two tabs. I could reorder these. So if I wanted the fitness club to appear above the best, I could just reorder those. I could change this text as well. So everything is something that you can manipulate as long as you set that up in your content source to do so. You could come here. You could change images out. So for instance, I can go into my media library. In this case, maybe I want to upload a new image, and let me see if I can get a nice cat image. One of these. Is this the cat folder? I can't.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go in there. I'll grab this fit cat, and I'll drag it in here, and then I'll save this media. You can see now we have our fit cat over here. So you can change your content pretty quick on the fly, and you get like a really direct correspondence between the thing that you're editing and the thing that you're seeing. And then keep in mind that all this is just simple JSON on the back end. So as a developer, you might want to look at your code so you can see the representation of all this content in JSON. Maybe this would be helpful if there's ever something wrong with your editor display. You could come in here, you could always change a key or manipulate that. Probably a lot of end users wouldn't use that experience. They'd probably edit through the actual editing side over here. So let me just show off a couple more fields. Let's look at maybe this about section here. We can come in here, there's WYSIWYG, so and this is going to be interesting because I really can't see this, but you can do different things, like maybe we want bulleted lists here, so I could create bullets, something like this. You can see on the side here, over on the right-hand side, it's creating that display. You could change that to numbers if you wanted to. Obviously, it just works, essentially works like a regular WYSIWYG would work, how you might expect. You could make something like this, a heading. And then this is something that, this part of the CMS, like adding a WYSIWYG or adding certain types of field widgets, that's an override that you can provide with something called a schema. So you'd get a regular text field out of the box by having a string in your JSON, and then you could add additional functionality to it like a WYSIWYG. There's other fields over here, like this is a entity reference field. So I created another, I actually did this on the way here. Stephanie was driving, thank you. And I created an entity reference field for these coaches. So essentially, I created a content type on the back end with 3 instances of a coach. And what we could come and do is we could take a look here and like start typing, and it'll find that content for us. We could pull in a different coach. You can see that switched that coach out for me over here on the right-hand side. We could come here. We could grab Steph as well and switch out Steph. So you can see that kind of switches out. So that's like an entity reference to other content within your site. So you can do a lot of interesting things with your field structure. This is just kind of scratching the surface. We really, we try to create some same defaults, but you can actually even create your own field widgets and add those as well. So maybe you want like a color picker, you want something like that. You can extend your CMS that way. Just show a couple more things. Let's take a look at classes here. And how am I doing on time? I got like 5 minutes before questions, is that?
10:23.
Okay. Okay, so again, these are components, so you could reorder these. Maybe you want the cardio and strength to appear above the weightlifting. Okay, reorder that. You could come in here. You could change this how you might expect. Maybe I want another cat here. I could choose a 5. Oh no, that's not gonna. That's too small. Let's go back here and grab another cat. How about this one? And change that. So now we have our cat over here. Numbers automatically get pulled into the CMS. So you can see that we have this little percent widget here. I can drag this and it'll change my little slider on the right there in the display. Again, these are all things that you can configure, but this is basically what your editing experience would look like. There are some other fields as well. Let's take a look at maybe, let's take a look at our blog below here. So this will show dates. Again, so we have our little blog items. Inside our blog items, we can edit and we could change things like our date. So you get a little date picker. This happens automatically as well, just because it recognizes date strings on the back end. So we're actually not doing any manipulation of that string to get it in that specific format on the front end. So normally you would probably in your template be like, I want, month, day, year, whatever. We just allow you to define it however you want in your JSON, and then we'll just display it that way for you if you want to do it. You can always manipulate it if you want to, but you can essentially come here and just write your JSON however you want, and we'll keep that formatting for you, and then you can pick your dates that way and add them to your site like that. So yeah, so essentially that's basically the editing experience in a nutshell. Maybe I should show one last thing here. You can add new components, so maybe you want another section here, so maybe you want more classes down here at the bottom. You can add some classes. Maybe you want another hero down there. So you can really add these components, add them to the page. You can then remove them very easily, and that's just manipulating the JSON on the back end. And then we could come here and we could always save this. So we made some changes. I commit those changes, and if I take a look at my code, and let's go here, you can see that there's some changes there. Let's just open up our Git history, so you can see all the changes that we just made on the front end, right? So the title, we changed that. We changed some other things there as well. Now, oh boy. Okay. You can also add new pages. So if you want to add new content, you can come up and add content up here like this. We have 2 content types supported. We have coaches and pages right now. You could add a new page, name it whatever you want. There's some validation here. So if you put a space, like this, and you try to save it, it'll say, no, you can't do that. If you tried to create a page that already exists, so our index page already exists, it'll tell it already exists, and it'll actually give me a little prompt to go and edit that content instead of trying to create new content, or we could create something new, right? Something entirely new here. It's a blank page with no components on it right now, but we could come here and we could quickly build a page out. So we could say, I want classes and about section. I can come over here and I can see that my page is already starting to take shape that way, change the content. Yeah, so that's largely the editing experience from a local perspective. I think it might be kind of nice just in the last few minutes here to just show a live site. So we're in the process of rebranding our nonprofit web development business as CauseWorks. So this is a live site that actually lives at causeworks.com. We haven't officially really launched this stuff yet, but essentially this all lives in a repository over on GitLab, right? So there's a CauseWorks repository, and we set up in our configuration just a basic connection to this app. So we created an OAuth application in GitLab. You can create this we're building Git-T support right now. We'd like to build GitHub support. They don't support Pixie auth right now, so that's kind of blocking us, but hopefully eventually they'll do that. There's been some interest in them doing that. So essentially what happens is, you connect to this app. It's all client-side, so you don't put any of your secrets or anything in there, and you just do a Pixie grant to the website, and essentially you can make changes from a live site back to your repository like this. So I've already logged in here. I could come here. Let's just take a look at maybe like a services page, and let's edit this. Oh, I'm doing a custom field thing here. You can ignore this right now. This is just a test I was doing. But okay, so we have a section that says we perform. Maybe we want this to say our team performs. Close enough. Okay, so I could come here and I could save this. So that saves. It gives me a little message that it commits. Come back to my repository. You can see right now that this was already built here. If I reload this, you'll see that it's running a build again. We can see exactly what we changed here if we look at our Git code. So you can see that that's our change there. And essentially what this will do is it will rebuild and redeploy back to the site, and we would have this information available to us on our site. Let's just go to like an uncached version here. Let's go to services, strategy. Let's see if I can break the cache. Oh, it's actually probably not finished building yet. Might take a second to finish, and then once it's finished, essentially you should be able to break the cache and see the change. Yeah, I think. Okay. Oh, stop for a second there. Yeah. Well, there's a caching issue there, but essentially, that once I could break it by just going to that file and change it. But we need to add some fingerprinting there to basically break that cache and make that a little more seamless. But essentially, that is the workflow that you can do locally, remote. Hopefully, that gives you a good sense of what that editing experience is like. I didn't get, because of time, I didn't get a chance to really dive into the code or how you'd extend this, but I'm happy to answer questions, or if people have specific questions about what that looks like, we can take a quick look, and I can show you. So, yeah. Any questions?
If I wanted to add a menu item, I didn't see that in the workflow. Could you maybe demonstrate that?
Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting point. This is a thing that I would like to have a little better. So I think that you can make any content a content source, right? So you could do, I think you should be able to do JSON menu items, and I do this on some of my sites that I build, or even tags or categories or taxonomies, and they all kind of live as JSON content, right? You don't necessarily want an endpoint for those. You don't want, So right now you kind of have to hack your own little endpoint in to make it editable through the interface. I plan on adding another aspect to the CMS here. So basically you can see content that does not have endpoints. So you can have like a back end. And also instead of going page by page, you could see an aggregate list of the content. So that's something that's going to be coming in the future. But that's a great question. I have put some sites that you can manipulate those things. You just have to rig it up yourself a little bit. Yeah.
Cool.
I've tried combining Go with front-end frameworks. I did Go and Vue, and the thing I always ran into is that like Vue expects to control everything, and so you end up kind of clashing with Go.
Yeah.
And you like to make something render as a static site and also like be an SPA. You kind of have to implement things redundantly. Like, have you found ways of making them play nicer together or avoiding that duplicate effort?
Yeah, no, that's definitely like the biggest challenge, and that's probably one of our biggest, at least in my mind, like one of the big things I want to improve in the future. We wanted a zero dependency environment, first of all, so you can use Plenti without downloading anything besides the binary. You don't need to have Node.js on your computer. You don't need NPM. You don't need any kind of dependency. Like it'll work without that. The way we do that is we build. I don't know if you're that familiar with Svelte, but Svelte's a fully compiled UI framework. So we have to build everything in a virtual V8 environment. So in our project, we spin that up. We put those things into like a little V8 environment. We compile them and then we deploy them. And it's not great. There's a lot of like really big sites for Plenti. We have kind of like a memory leak, to be honest. So exponentially, as the site goes up, our performance gets bad because of the way we're doing it. There's some improvements we can make in the near term without completely throwing this out to fix the memory leak, but it's always going to have not as fast an experience as we like. We have to client-side render, server-side render, and then change server-side render components into HTML, and that's all happening in V8. So there's some redundancy there. I think ultimately I'd like to see some improvements in tooling. We're probably going to have to take that charge ourselves, and I don't know, the crazy thought that some other folks who have been helping with this project we've been kicking around is someday doing our own compiling UI framework. We just really don't want to go down that road. I mean, Svelte is awesome, and it works really great, and it's a huge undertaking, and it's just like, we would never compete on that level of framework. It'd be a much simpler experience. But yeah, it's kind of like one of the challenging aspects right now, for sure.
So you have, right now on this example one, you had coaches and pages. What's the process for coming up with a new content type?
Yeah, so you could basically create a new content site source through the CLI. So basically, if you want to do it, you can do it manually or you can do it through the CLI. So if you want to do it manually, you essentially would come here and you would add a new folder to your content folder, and then you would add a new template in, I can't really see what I'm looking at, but in your, is this
a new Svelte file.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So in this content folder inside your layouts. But you essentially could come in here, and maybe I can make this bigger. Okay, you could do Plenti. This is what I did earlier on the way here. So Plenti new, type, test, and it'll create that experience for you automatically. So it just generates those things for you. And then you can go in there and edit those. So there's a lot of little helpers in terms of like the CLI to just speed things up if it's helpful. But you don't have to do it. There's nothing in there that you have to do. Yeah.
When you were adding new modules, I saw that they were all like kind of pre-populated with content.
Yeah.
Is that defined in the JSON files?
Yeah, so that's something, let me kind of distinguish here. So if I can find that, where's the other side? So you can get an editing experience like, let's go home. You can get an editing experience like these components by default by just having them in your content source. But in order to have this little button to add new ones there, that's where you have to start extending your CMS a little bit. But it's all default stuff. So the way you would do it is essentially you create a underscore components folder inside of your content source. So anything with underscore is a special name in Plenti. Our defaults are the default things when you add a new page. That's your default JSON. Our schema is how you define those field widgets. It's like, oh, I don't want a date field here. I want a number field or whatever it is. That's how you do it with your schemas. Each one of these components is simply that. So a component is what's your component name, and then what's its defaults and what's its schema. And once you define those things, you can reference them. So for instance, in our pages type, we have our schema here, and we basically said we want components and we want to allow these components here. And that's how we extended that to have that option. We can come here, so for instance, we can come here, so right now we can add, about classes, whatever the last three say. I could come here and I could say, I don't want this to have hero anymore. We could delete that, save this, give it a second to rebuild, and then let's come here and take a look. So it's gone, right? So that's how you you draw those links between those things. Components can reference other components. So you can have like many nested layers. You do the same way. They all have schema files. So it's like, oh, this component references that component with that experience. Just draw the schema chain, and they all work that way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.